All right, students. Well, today we are going to go ahead and look at decimals as it relates to multiplication and division. So we should have our foldable out. So in your foldable, we are finally going to go ahead and fill it out with the final section called multiply and divide decimals. So take this out, get a pen, paper, and all of the other general things you need, and we are going to go ahead and start this lesson video. So with that being said, let's go ahead and switch screens and move this forward. So on your screen, you should see that I got the foldable notes. Don't forget that if you miss any of this information or need to look it up again, it is in OneNote all the way at the bottom. So right now I'm working in the foldable for first hour, but because this is a lesson video for first and third hour, I will copy it into third hour also. Okay. All right, so with that being said, at this point you should have all your materials ready. Feel free to pause this video at any point as you need to ensure that you catch all the material. I'm going to kind of breeze through much of the core notes, and then during the live session in class we will go over a bunch of examples and ensure that we got this all locked up. Okay, so let's begin. So I'm going to basically bunch multiplication and division rules together, because as we have seen from previous chapters or previous sections, the rules are very standard. So basically when we multiply and divide, if they are the same sign, and I'm going to just use some quick notation, if they are the same sign, answer is positive. So that's like one of those set rules that never changes. So same sign, answer is positive. If they are different signs, the answer will be negative. So this is something that carries over from integer math, fraction math, all of that. So take a moment to go ahead and get this information down. Pause this video as needed before we go ahead and continue here. All right, so continuing on, what you should notice is that the rules, okay, and I've said this a few times and I'll continue to say it, is that the rules don't change when it comes to integers. When we start dealing with positive and negative, all we have to do is be careful as it relates to decimal multiplication and decimal division, the rules that we've known from previous chapters, previous years. So I'm going to start with multiplication because that's usually the most straightforward. So in your multiplication section, let's go ahead and do a couple core examples. And on the side, I'm going to go ahead not only talk about things that verbally go through my head, okay, but also write it down, little tips and tricks to ensure that we don't we get a little more comfortable with the multiplication. So I'm going to show you two examples. One where we have a negative and a positive written in this style, negative 2.75 times 3.1. And then don't forget, we also have the style where if we have just parentheses, it's also multiplication. So take a moment to write these two examples down. I'm going to zoom in on it. Okay, so you got negative 2.75 times 3.1, negative 1.27 times negative 2.02. So we're going to do these two. So the first thing that I am going to note is that each one of these, okay, has different sets of integers. So for the first one, I see a negative times a positive. That is going to be a negative answer. So in my mind, and you notice in previous, I go ahead and put a little indicator there to keep track of it. Okay. So when we multiply, there's one thing that we got to be careful about. Okay. We stack them, but we don't line up the decimals. Okay. So the way that I call it is that we stack with the one with the most digits on top. Okay, stack with the most digits on top. So if you notice in the first example, I automatically started with negative 2.75 on the top, okay, because that has 3 digits, and then I put 3.1 below. So you're going to stack them with the most digits on top. Another thing that we got to remember from decimal multiplication is don't line up the decimals. Don't line up the decimals. Okay? So when we're doing these multiplication, that is, we just stack them and do the straight multiplication. So I'm going to go ahead and do that fairly quick here. So 5 times 1 is 5, 7, 2. And notice all I'm doing is multiplying 5 times 1, 7 times 1, 2 times 1, and just moving across. Then after that, when I move to the second line, I'm going to put a placeholder 0 because I'm moving to the second. Okay. Some teachers have shown it with an X. I just use a 0. 3 times 5 is 15. Carry the 1, 21, 22. Okay, carry the 2, 6, 7, 8. So at this point, very standard, okay, and we're going to add. So this you should be comfortable with because this is old stuff, things that you have done before. So finishing strong, I got 8525, and I attach the negative at the end because I reminded myself it's negative. Now the last thing we got to be careful of is multiplication is that we count the decimal places, and move it over that amount of spaces. So there are 3 decimal places in the top. Okay, so I'm going to highlight those 1, 2, 3. So basically on the bottom, I'm going to move that decimal over 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and that's the proper way of doing it. My final answer is negative 8.525. Everything looks pretty solid. So multiplication of decimals, usually historically, a lot of you are pretty strong with this, but we just got to be careful whenever we get something odd, weird, and keep track of our signs. So for the next one, I'm going to do this a little bit quicker. I'm actually going to pause this video, and in about 2-3 seconds, it'll show up, and I'll break it down. All right, students. So on your screen, it should magically appear. The only tricky part about this example is notice that there are a total of 3 digits for each, so you can stack it any way you want. Personally, I put 2.02 at the bottom just to show you something a little bit different, but most students actually, from what I've seen, stack the larger number up top with the smaller one at the bottom if they have the same amount of digits. But the one quirk that you'll notice, and the reason why I stacked the second one underneath, is that when you are doing the second line, there's that 0, okay? And because there's a 0, there's a line that you have to skip. So that's basically multiplication of decimals 101, things you have learned in 6th grade and 5th grade. But if you're confused about that, that's something you'll have to work with me individually. But otherwise, if what you see on the screen looks pretty straightforward and you understand it, okay, you're looking pretty good for decimal operations. So we got 2 core examples here. I'm going to pause the video once again, let it roll for about 2-3 seconds, and then after that, we're going to move on to some decimal operations. Okay, take a peek at this, make sure you got it, and then we'll continue. All right, students, so on your screen, it should have switched to division of decimals. So we're going to add this section, continue it in your foldable. Well, when it comes to division, okay, the rules are exactly the same as multiplication, as we said at the very top. So we're going to use the same sign. Is going to go ahead, and if it's same sign, it's going to be positive, and if it's different signs, it's going to be negative. You do not have to write this if you've already gotten it up top. So this is just as for our notes purposes, okay? It's a reminder. So I should be a little more specific. It's going to be a positive answer. It's going to be a negative answer. Okay? So the same rules apply. Now division is usually a little bit quirky because, okay, it's how it's presented. Probably the most confusing thing I see happening is that we got to be careful of what's doing the dividing, basically what goes under the umbrella, I call it, the division, and then what we do with the actual decimals, moving it and switching the divisor. So I'm going to showcase that with 2 core examples. So get these 2 examples down. The first one is negative 0.72 divided by negative 0.9. Remember, even though it is a fraction, fractions are just fancy division. Okay? And the second example I'm going to use is negative 0.801 divided by parentheses negative 0.09. So presented in 2 different ways. Both styles are perfectly appropriate, but they both mean division. Okay? So the key thing to remember about these is that the divisor is the bottom number and the second number, okay? And that's what goes on the outside. So the divisor goes on the outside. And that's what we got to be careful of. So just think about how it's read. Like first example, it's negative 0.72 divided by negative 0.9. So it's saying the bottom number is divided by, okay? That's what's doing the dividing. And then the second example, negative 0.801 divided by negative 0.09, okay? So with that being said, take a moment to go ahead and get that down, and let's go ahead and tackle that first example. Because I said the bottom number goes on the outside, I'm going to go ahead and do so. Now I'm going to keep track of this. I'm not going to of the signs because I noticed that it's a negative divided by a negative, so my final answer is going to be positive. I'm going to keep track of that. So I'm going to put 0.9 on the outside and 0.72 on the inside. Okay. Now this is where we got to think back to a long time ago in 6th grade and 5th grade. We want to switch the first number to a whole number. Okay, so let me highlight that. That we want to switch to a whole number. So to do that, we're going to move the decimal. Switch to a whole number because we don't want to go ahead and divide that out using a decimal. So I'm going to move it over 1. If I move the decimal over 1, I'm also going to move the decimal over 1 on the inside. At this point, one thing that I always recommend, okay, is to rewrite it. A lot of students have a tendency to go ahead and just continue it from up there. It looks really messy. Rewrite it. Take that little moment to rewrite it. And I'm going to add a couple placeholder zeros at the end. I'm not for sure if I need it, but I will add it, okay? So continuing on here, make sure you line up that decimal above, okay, and then finish strong. 9 into 7 is 0. 9 into 72 is 8 times. And finishing that off, 0. I didn't even need that final 0. It's 0.8. And with my final answer being positive, as I noted at the very top, that's finished. Okay, so there's two things that came from this problem. Make sure I'm going to zoom in on it. Make sure you're careful in knowing which number goes on the outside, okay? And you're careful in moving that decimal over. So at this point, take a moment to pause this video as needed. In a moment, okay, I'm going to switch gears to the second problem and do it a little bit quicker, a little bit faster, but showcase all of the main points of it, okay? So this video is going to pause for about 3 seconds and then it will magically show up on the screen. All right, students, it should pop right back up on the screen. So if you look at the second example, once again, be careful what goes on the outside. 0.09 goes on the outside. It's doing the dividing. And this time, we had to move the decimal over twice. So since I had to move it over twice on the outside, I moved over twice on the inside, and it became 9 into 80.1. Make sure you are rewriting. Okay, so until you get super duper strong with this, rewriting it so you don't lose track of the decimal is one of the most important things to do to ensure your organization is there, and once again, you don't lose track of that decimal. Finishing the rest of it, you should have came out to be 8.9. Okay, so at this point, okay, that completes the core examples for division of decimals. During the next live class, we will go over quite a few more higher level questions and make sure we get decent practice to get a little bit stronger at this. So with that being said, if you have questions or you need to review this video, feel free to do so. Don't forget, these notes are in OneNote, so double check that as needed. All right, enjoy. Thank you. Email me if you have any questions.